Sego, it is April 16th. I'm not going to make any tax day references, but it is April 16th. And I want to welcome you to Let's Talk Native on the LTN Radio Network. This program breaks all the rules for Native radio. No buffalo speeches, no mystic healing, no special Indian prayers. We tackle the real issues facing Native people with a look back at our glorious and our grave history, a tough look at where we're at now, and a look forward to our ongoing battles for sovereignty and autonomy. Let's Talk Native is produced in association with Iroquois Promotions on the LTN Radio Network, streaming live from the Cattaraugus territory of the Seneca Nation and simulcast on the Gwe, that's CKWE in Tyendinaga. And you can find us, our audio streaming live at www.ltnradionet.com. And, of course, we are streaming live on Facebook Live as well. So you can check us out on Facebook. And I'll look for your comments there during the breaks and that kind of thing. Two major issues I want to talk about, or two, I don't know, you can call them major issues. One of them is kind of an old issue. We're going to talk about the gaming issue again, and the gaming revenue issue. And I feel like I have to, because I have to respond to the Buffalo News, their editorial in their paper today. And their editorial, and this is from their editorial board. So this isn't just somebody, it's just some guy offering, or some woman offering their opinion. This is the position of the Buffalo News. And I think going through their editorial, and it's not a terribly long thing. I may just read it outright. I don't know. But I want to go through it paragraph by paragraph, because there are some clear mischaracterizations of the truth. And again, the bias that the Buffalo News has expressed on many occasions towards Native issues in general, but certainly the Seneca Nation, is a matter of history. And it certainly does border on racism many times, especially when you clearly mischaracterize the truth. And they make some very bold, assumptions and characterizations that, and I'll go through it line by line. And of course, they miss a great deal of the underlying issues and truths and facts associated with the relationship between the Seneca Nation and the state of New York as it relates to gaming. And again, making the final line of their editorial suggests that the Senecas have an ethical obligation to pay Niagara Falls. I mean, now we're going to talk about what an ethical obligation. Where do we start? But anyway, well, I'm going to go through that. Now, the other thing I'm going to talk about also is, and I got to tell you, don't understand this one at all, but I got hit on 6 or 7 different fronts here with people posting or sending me messages or emails on what Todd Gates was thinking when he made his presidential proclamation that next Thursday is Israel Independence Day here on the Seneca Nation. And what that's supposed to mean. I'll read the proclamation, and then I'll raise my own issues on everything that's wrong with what Todd Gates did on this presidential proclamation. And again, I can't make sense of it, but I will at very least express, without, again, this isn't about anti-Semitism, but without getting into, Israel bashing or the bashing of Jewish people, I think there's just some clear facts that need to be established about what Israel represents versus what the Seneca Nation represents, and where the common ground is and where the common ground isn't. And I think we'll go through some of that in the second half of the show. But let me get right into it. I'm going to see if I can pull up. I'll see if I can pull up the column from the Buffalo News, and it's kind of disturbing, and I'm going to go through it. I'll read through, and I'll break it down a little bit. I'll go through some of the things that are just, I guess, mischaracterized. I mean, in the opening line of this thing, the Buffalo News says there's no question poor negotiation jammed up the budgets of at least 3 cities. So they're attributing this thing to poor negotiation, meaning the conflict between the Seneca Nation and the state of New York over gaming revenue sharing of gaming proceeds. Now, this isn't about negotiation. This is about a contract, the compact, the New York State Seneca Nation Gaming Compact, and it is clear. I mean, there's, and people can say that there's a loophole, and I'll get into that, but but they started off by just saying flat out that this is that there was poor negotiating. Now, if they're blaming Andrew Cuomo for poor negotiation, let's be clear: this gaming compact was negotiated under George Pataki. And if they're suggesting that somehow Andrew Cuomo should have renegotiated the revenue sharing when they renewed the compact, well, I mean, I guess you could make that case, but by the time this thing expired 13 months ago, it would have been pretty difficult for the state of New York to make a much of an argument about collecting revenue from the Seneca Nation. But let me go right through it. It says, there's no question that poor negotiations jammed up the budgets of at least 2 out of the 3 cities desperate to get casino money. Well, the state of New York has received $1.5 billion from gaming revenue. Those municipalities, they've received almost $400 million out of that. $250 million went to Niagara Falls alone. So when people are suggesting that somehow these places have been slighted, again, the facts aren't being covered. I'll continue. Governor Cuomo and the Senecas must act quickly to fix this problem. If not, Niagara Falls and Salamanca will suffer tremendous financial pain while Buffalo finds further discomfort. First off, I think the writing on this thing is terrible. There's some grammatical problems. When they say Buffalo finds further discomfort, further from what? I mean, that doesn't even make sense. But anyway, as recently reported in the news, nothing has been resolved between the state and Seneca Nation. Meanwhile, in Niagara Falls, a potential class of 3-year-old pre-kindergartners has been put on hold. In Salamanca, laid-off police and firefighters never got called back, and drivers are stalled waiting for black-topped roads. They can stop dreaming. Again, really, really poor writing. But I got to ask a question. 3-year-olds? Pre-kindergartners? I thought pre-K was like 4-year-olds. So now these poor 3-year-olds are going to have to spend time with mom or dad? Wow, what a terrible thing. I mean, I don't even understand. They're making it sound like the Seneca Nation is creating victims out of 3-year-olds. When I was 3 years old, I wasn't in a pre-K program. And you know what? My kids and my current grandkids never went through a 3-year-old pre-K program. And so the Buffalo News is taking the position that the Seneca Nation is somehow costing a potential class of 3-year-olds from going into school 2 years before kindergarten. I mean, I don't know. That seems bizarre to me. But anyway, and again, if the writer of this is suggesting that drivers are being hampered by potholes, that's not the same thing as saying drivers are stalled waiting for black-topped roads. I don't even know what that means. But anyway, at issue whether the Seneca Nation violated its compact with New York State when it stopped sharing casino revenue 13 months ago. Both sides must select a third arbitrator to help settle the dispute. No, at issue isn't whether the Seneca Nation violated the compact. What at issue is whether the state can somehow convince an arbitration panel that, in spite of the language of the compact, that the Senecas should keep paying, and what keep paying would look like. I mean, that's what is at issue, and the Seneca Nation didn't ask for arbitration on this thing. The Seneca Nation just said, look, the language is what it is. The state asked for arbitration, and the state has dragged its feet. So when it says both sides must select a third arbitrator, that's all in the state. I mean, the state also tried to raise the issue about where the venue should be, whether this arbitration should take place in New York City instead of here in Western New York. That doesn't even make sense. Again, this is completely mischaracterized by the Buffalo News. Let's see. The state failed miserably in negotiating a compact, and the Senecas are taking full advantage. An irritated governor has threatened to build a commercial casino in Niagara Falls in direct competition with the Senecas and in an already glutted casino market. Look, the state got over on the Senecas. The Senecas did not get over on the state. Again, the Senecas paid $1.5 billion to the state of New York for an exclusivity provision that really the state never honored. So, I mean, to suggest that somehow the state failed miserably, I mean, that's mischaracterizing, what this is all about anyway. And again, to suggest that an irritated governor is threatening to build a casino in Niagara Falls. I mean, look, the casinos that the state has built, they are failing miserably. I mean, those are what has failed miserably. I've talked about it here on the show. Del Lago can't even handle its debt service based on its revenue intake. And where did Del Lago think it was going to get its players from? It believed it was going to take market share away from the Seneca Nation. And you know what? It did. The Seneca gaming market has shrunk, or their share of the market has shrunk over $100 million in the last few years. And granted, some of that isn't just the state. I mean, some of it's other states and Canada's market too. But you know what? The Canada's market existed before the Senecas opened up. They peaked out at one point where what they were sending the state was almost $200 million a year. Now, what the state is crying about is what would have been $110 million. That's what that's stake. But let me finish. And clearly, the state has created a glut in the casino market with their racetrack casinos and with their new casinos, including the one in Rochester and the one out near Albany. The Senecas followed the nation's agreement with New York and paid the state 25% of its slot machine revenue in exchange for exclusive rights to operate 3 Las Vegas-style casinos in western New York. Roughly $110 million annually was sent to Albany, and the state issued part of that proceeds to various local entities. Look, that's averaged out over the 14-year period. I mean, it actually got much higher than that. At one point, it was 25% of the slot revenue. It didn't start that way. And before the state really expanded its gaming even farther, it had peaked out at, like I said, almost $200 million for a couple of years there. So, now it's dropped significantly. But this is, again, mischaracterization. The Seneca Nation followed the nation's agreement with New York State and paid the state 25% of its slot revenue in exchange for exclusive rights to operate 3 Las Vegas-style casinos. Look, that's not true. They didn't pay 25% for exclusive rights to operate casinos. What it paid for was the state's promise to provide an exclusive market. The right to do gaming the Senecas had. So by calling it the exclusive right to operate gaming casinos, suggests that it's a right that the Senecas had to pay for. The Senecas had the right to do gaming. There was no question about that. They had that before the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act was passed. They had that before a Supreme Court decision out in California went in favor, was ruled in favor of a native group that was doing high stakes bingo and other gaming enterprises. They had that because, and all that case did was recognize the right, not grant the right. All the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act did was really establish a framework for the states to participate in native gaming. And that framework was rigid. It didn't give the native people the right to do gaming. If anything, it gave the states rights to get involved in native gaming. That's what it did. Okay, and then it goes on. It says, the states found what many would call a loophole in the agreement. No, the Senecas didn't find a loophole in the agreement. The Senecas negotiated a compact in 2002, which started in 2002, which would pay the state 18% of its slot revenue for the first 4 years. It would pay 22% for the next 3 years, and then it would pay 25% for the final 7 years of the agreement in exchange for an exclusivity that the state was to provide. So the state was supposed to make sure that the gaming market, again, west of Rochester, including Rochester, would not be infringed upon, so that the Senecas would have an exclusive zone of non-competition. That's what that's what the spirit of the agreement was, and that's literally what the language was. So what the state conceded was essentially a gaming market for all of Western New York for and they agreed they wouldn't compete and wouldn't allow competition against the Seneca Nation in exchange for slot proceeds. And then the state went about violating that by turning their racetracks into slot parlors and ultimately passing a referendum to legalize gaming. But I mean, that's to characterize this thing as they would pay for the right to do gaming, and that's kind of the way the way it's written. It wasn't the right to do gaming. What they paid the state for was an exclusivity zone that never really existed, or if it did exist, it only existed in the very first few years. The Senecas found what many would call that loophole. Okay, that's what that was a paragraph. Okay, let me see. That is, their required payment to the state ended after the 14th year of the deal, according to their reading of the 21-year compact. Look, the compact was a 14-year compact with a 7-year renewal, and the language couldn't be clearer. I mean, the language lays out what the Senecas would pay: 18%, 22%, then 25% through year 14. That's it. I mean, there's nothing in the compact. There's nothing in this legally binding contract that lays out any payments past 14 years. That's not a loophole. That's a reading of the document. The state has made a strong opposing argument. The governor's spokesman stressed that the Senecas have an obligation to pay in exchange for exclusivity. Well, where does this exclusivity exist? And what is the value of that exclusivity? They breached their obligation and therefore breached the compact. Look, the state breached the compact, and that's why they surrendered $200 million when the Senecas first withheld payments. But you know what? In 2013, when they reached that settlement, the Senecas kept $200 million, paid $400 million of what was withheld, and then just went forward for the next couple of years because it was almost over. The revenue sharing was termed out to end at 2016. So the only breach that took place in the revenue sharing provision of the compact was by the state. All the Senecas are doing is implementing what they negotiated in good faith back leading up to 2002, and this is agreement that the governor had nothing. This current governor had nothing to do with. So that couldn't be more clear. Meanwhile, conditions are getting worse in two cities that became dependent upon casino money. Assemblyman Angelo Marinello, Republican Niagara Falls, during a floor debate over the state budget, mentioned that the city of Niagara Falls is behind in receiving revenue of about $22 million. Look, they're not behind. They're not getting it. According to Mayor Paul Deister and the school superintendent, that meant the end of some plans for this year. Less money means no match for the state highway aid to double the amount of streets that it repaves each year. Streetscapes featuring ash trees that are dead or dying because of the emerald ash borer will have to stay put, and new ones won't be planted. I mean, just listing all of these things that somehow all became dependent on gaming revenue that was supposed to go to these municipalities as not just a windfall to spend at any way they want, but it was supposed to go towards increasing tourism and economic development. Oh, there we go. Niagara Falls Economic Development Agency, which will have to make do without the $500,000 a year in casino money to replenish its grant. Well, tell me this. What did you do with the 14 years that you had that money? What economic development have you done to make up for what would ultimately be a termed out revenue sharing program? None. The city can forget about funding a downtown ranger program that assisted tourists vital to its economy. Look, this is, just going through. Niagara Falls Board of Education and Niagara Falls Memorial Hospital will not receive what typically amounts to a yearly $750,000. Niagara Falls is doing much better than Salamanca, mostly built on Seneca land there. Their Native American residents can opt out of paying property taxes. Its tax levy is less than $1 million. Officials had $16.9 million in unappropriated surplus that is being spent down to keep the city of less than 6,000 operating. Look, the city of Salamanca, if the Seneca Nation should just take that over. There was no way the city of Salamanca was going to survive the setup that was laid out as a part of the Salamanca Lease Settlement Act. Because as more Senecas bought property, why would they pay taxes to the municipality when it's Seneca land in the first place? So, I mean, the Seneca Nation should just take over the city, and that will happen ultimately anyway, no matter what. I mean, running the city off of casino revenue. And keep in mind, in order for this money to come to these municipalities, over $100 million has to be sent to Albany for $25 million to come back, or for $30 million to come back. I mean, it's So when I hear these folks in Buffalo or Niagara Falls saying, "Well, the Seneca Nation should pay the state," you're suggesting the Seneca Nation should pay the state $150 million. So what? $16 or $20 million can come back to you? I mean, it's an absurd proposition. The situation is less dire for Buffalo, where casino money amounts to only a tiny percentage of the city's general fund. Niagara Falls and Salamanca made the mistake of becoming dependent on the casino money. That was their mistake. Still, the Senecas must know they have an ethical obligation here, if nothing else. Well, look, ethical obligation. To suggest that the Senecas have an ethical obligation to just throw money into the black hole that is the Paul Deister's budget system is just absurd. And if the Seneca Nation is going to fund Niagara Falls or fund Salamanca, they should just take over Salamanca and do away with some of the municipal expenses that shouldn't exist in the first place. They should just deal with that directly. I mean, there are a lot of problems with what the Buffalo News has represented here. Most of it having to do with their mischaracterization of the facts. The bottom line is, part of what the Seneca Niagara Casino did was stop the flow of money going into Canada. That's why New York State wanted the Seneca Nation to do a casino there in the first place, because revenue was bleeding out of Western New York into Canada. And you know what? Even if the lion's share of that revenue stayed with the Seneca Nation, it only stays with the Seneca Nation for a short period of time, because the Seneca Nation spends all of its money here in Western New York. It's not a foreign corporation. It is not a Malaysia gaming company. It is not something with New York City shareholders. It is a government that funds its own programs with that gaming revenue and other enterprises that it has. And all of that money is spent back in. It's spent back in by the Seneca Nation, and it's spent back in Western New York by the Senecas themselves. There was over almost 3,500 employees, jobs that were created by Seneca Gaming. And you know what? Some of these numbers that the Buffalo News is throwing around, the Seneca Nation put money in Niagara Falls hospitals above and beyond what the gaming revenue cut was supposed to be. And you know what they did? They did a lot of other things within the city of Buffalo and Salamanca as well that were not prescribed or dictated through some sort of gaming revenue sharing. They did it. They did it anyway. And if the city of Niagara Falls and the city of Buffalo and the city of Salamanca would stop lining up behind their Prince Andrew and would be willing to come to the table, there was probably some dollars that the Seneca Nation would have allowed to flow into those municipalities. But you know, they won't even come to the table. And for any of you who are saying, well, it's not fair, the Senecas aren't paying for services. Yes, they are. The Seneca Nation pays for their services. They don't get free electric. They don't get free water. They don't get free anything. And you know what? To the extent that there may be an uptick in financial burden on the fire department or the police department, the Seneca Nation has put the offer out many times. Come to the table. Let's create a way to itemize a billing system, and we'll pay for whatever services your services render to us. But you know what? There's a no-show. And why is there a no-show? Because they're still holding out hope that Prince Andrew is gonna fleece the Seneca Nation for $100 or $200 million a year. And again, I got to reiterate, the state has established gaming both within the exclusivity zone during the period that Seneca's paid, and has increased its gaming presence taking market share away from the Seneca Nation with this casino in Schenectady and on the other side of Rochester, and with their $1.5 billion enterprise that they're building down in the Catskills. Look, the Seneca Nation lost $100 million of its gaming market, and most of that to the state of New York. So when people say, "Well, it's not fair," then take it up with the state. And Niagara Falls, you sit at one of the 7 wonders of the world. And why aren't you benefiting from that? Why aren't you benefiting from the tourist draw that the Niagara Falls should represent? Why? Because you're being fleeced by the state. And Buffalo News, some of the things that you said here is just flat out wrong. This isn't a loophole. This is the contract. And the contract ended in 2016. And the fact that you, as the one of the largest newspaper publication, are characterizing this thing falsely instead of having an unbiased approach to this issue. Instead of stating for the record, talk to one of the state. I had Bob Batson on this show, a law professor at Albany Law College, and his reading of this compact is the exact same as my reading of this compact. And he thinks the state is in a dire position to try to fight this thing. And the reason the state is dragging its feet on arbitration is because they know that they're going to lose. They would have lost in 2013 had the Senecas not accepted their offer to allow them to keep $200 million of the escrowed money. But you know what? Right now, the state knows it's going to lose. That's why it's dragged its feet in terms of where this arbitration will take place, and they continue to drag their feet on the selection of the third arbitrator, the third judge in this thing. It's not going to happen. They're dragging their feet because they expect the Seneca Nation will cut a deal. Well, you know what? If there's one thing that Del Lago and Rivers Casino have proven, is that there is a glut in the gaming market, and the gaming market can't even support the state's licensed casinos. So what is it that the state thinks that they can offer? The racetrack casinos aren't even doing very well. They're trying to negotiate bailouts for them, including Vernon Downs in Central New York, and of course these big dollar casinos that the state was supposed to cash in on isn't quite working out that way. Well, the state might get their percentage, but it looks like the owners of Del Lago anyway are maybe in some real trouble when it comes time to that they have to pay their balloon payments on their financing. There's some major trouble. The state of New York clearly has nothing to offer the Seneca Nation in terms of gaming exclusivity. They've destroyed that market. And what else could they possibly offer the Seneca Nation? There's very little. So going forward, there's little hope that a revenue sharing agreement with the state is ever going to take place. And as long as Niagara Falls and Buffalo and Salamanca line themselves up behind Prince Andrew, the longer they wait, the less chance they're going to have of negotiating any real settlement with the or any kind of relationship with the Seneca Nation on the sharing of any revenue. So anyway, we'll take a break. We're at the bottom of the hour. We'll take a break when we come back. I got to talk about Israel Independence Day coming up next week here in the Seneca Nation for some strange reason. We'll be back after this.
Sun comes up on another day. to feel like we got trouble in the way. I'm here to tell you it wasn't always this.
All right, thanks for coming back. Hey, first let me go ahead and thank my sponsors for their support for what I do here and my show in New York as well. I want to thank Ross and Holly John and the RJE family of businesses, Eric White and ERW Enterprises, and the good folks at Legacy 420 in Tandanega. I also want to thank individuals like Ed Schindler and Cynthia Trice and Neville Spring for their contributions from time to time that certainly help me out as I'm making the trips to New York and trying to upgrade the things that we do around here as well. Look, I also want to thank those who have helped in the past, and there was many of you. I mean, we're entering our 8th year now, and we couldn't have survived all those years of being on commercial radio and the like if we didn't have so many of you step up and buy ads and do the kind of thing that we did when we were on commercial radio. So something we don't do anymore. I'd love to see some of you guys come back and throw some resources at us here, but I certainly do thank you for what you did when you did it. It allowed us to continue, and I thank you for doing your part. I also want to thank Unity Stream and Apache Radio Net for providing our streaming, and I want to thank CKWE, again, the Gway and Tandanega, for their simulcast and the rebroadcasts, as well as Netroots Radio, Real People's Media, and Indigenous Resistance Radio for carrying Let's Talk Native on their networks. I also want to thank all of you who share the show. Many times I get asked, why am I always on my phone when we start the show? I got to tell you, when we start the show on our Facebook live feed, and that's how people know I'm on my phone because they're seeing it, right? I'm sharing the show, and I'm doing some of the final adjustments on, again, on the text involved in the Facebook live stream. I'm actually setting up the show during that first, 4 or 5 minutes that we start broadcasting live on Facebook. So in case you're wondering who I'm texting so diligently, I'm not really texting. I'm actually doing some of the work associated with the show at the time. So I feel like I had to mention that. Hey, the other thing I want to mention is, the news doesn't cover a lot of the things that impact some people. And there's plenty of Stormy Daniels and Donald Trump and James Comey and and news associated with that kind of stuff. But over the last few days, Kauai in Hawaii has been inundated with rain, and there's been some major flooding there. And I have some friends there. I actually do radio out there on songs of sovereignty on Kauai Community Radio. So I wanted to, give a mention, and I ask that you take a look. I mean, look it up. I mean, it's on. I mean, I have a lot of Hawaiian group pages that I'm associated with, so I see a lot of the posts, and I've developed a lot of friends over the years in Hawaii. So I see the posts and I see the devastation, and I've seen people lost their homes. All of their animals, have perished in some of these communities, and again, it is significant. And, when people look at, what they can do to help people in various places, I haven't seen any postings for crowdsource funding or anything else. And when there is, I'll post those things up. And I do encourage people to reach out and find out, take a look at the devastation that the island of Kauai has suffered out there. And know that, man, there's a lot of indigenous people there, a lot of Native Hawaiians who I support in their effort to, to assert their independence. And again, my heart goes out to those guys, and my thoughts are with them. So anyway, I encourage listeners to take a look online and look at some of the flooding that's taking place, so you'll know what the devastation is. Because at some point, I'm hoping we can, do some funding to help some of the victims of the flooding out there. All right, now I got to talk about this now. I got hit with this mostly today, and it's this proclamation by the president of the Seneca Nation. And I got to tell you, as I read this thing, I'm just wondering who advised this. And look, I understand that there are relationships that are looked at, commercial and trade relationships with places that have certainly different ideologies than we do. But for whatever reason, let me just read this. And this comes from the Seneca Nation of Indians, but it's really a presidential proclamation. So this is Todd Gates is doing, and it says Israel Independence Day, 70th anniversary of Israel's independence. Whereas the Seneca Nation is pleased to recognize the 70th anniversary of Israel's independence on Thursday, April 19th, 2018. And whereas the Seneca Nation and the State of Israel share in common a passion for freedom and a willingness to fight for and defend our sovereignty and our shared right to be a free and independent people. And whereas the Seneca Nation has admiration and respect, here we go, for the warrior spirit of the Israeli people. And whereas the warrior spirit of the Israeli people has enabled the State of Israel to protect and defend its sovereignty and its very existence against all that have attempted to destroy it. And therefore, be it resolved that I, Todd Gates, President of the Seneca Nation, do hereby proclaim April 19th as Israel Independence Day on the territory of the Seneca Nation. Look, when I first saw that, I was like speechless. Look, I get the whole Israel Independence Day thing, and and after the Holocaust of World War II, and the genocide that was committed against them at the hands of the Nazis and that kind of stuff. But let's be clear. Israel is a theocracy. It is a state born out of a religious ideology that if you aren't a part of that ideology, you don't get to vote in that country. It is not a democracy. It is not a nation that is really about fighting for the freedom of all people, only their people. And they have invaded Palestinian territories. They have abused the Palestinian people. Even as we speak, there is Israeli military killing Palestinian protesters, unarmed Palestinian protesters. And you know what? They've got people set up on lawn chairs watching Israeli citizens, watching their Israeli military, these warrior spirit guys, killing unarmed Palestinian protesters. I'm sorry. That is just something that's hard to embrace. And for the Seneca Nation president to make this proclamation, seemingly oblivious to some of the contradictions. And here are some of the contradictions. First off, there are many people in the Jewish community, both in Israel and here in the United States, that oppose our use as Native people of the word Holocaust. They are the Holocaust deniers. Our Holocaust. They deny our Holocaust. There are, again, Jewish scholars who just cringe at the notion of putting the word American in front of Holocaust and suggesting that the genocide committed against our people in any way, shape, or form could ever be compared to the Jewish Holocaust. And this is the nation that Todd Gates feels compelled to somehow do a celebration of their independence here in the Seneca Nation? Well, and let me take it a little step farther. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, I know she doesn't represent Israel. She is on the U.S. Supreme Court. But she's a Jewish American liberal justice who cited the doctrine of Christian discovery in a case where she ruled against the Oneidas. And the Oneidas are Haudenosaunee people. So this so-called warrior spirit, look, in Seneca Nation, the only warriors that are truly embraced by the Seneca Nation are the ones who put on a U.S. military uniform. Because otherwise, you've got to state for the record that the genocide that we fought against was the very country that supports and bankrolls Israel. So, look, I'm not trying to bash Israel, really. I'm not. But before the Seneca Nation should have taken a position to praise Israel and their so-called warrior spirit, they should see what that Israeli military has done and what they are doing to indigenous peoples in that side of the world. I mean, if the Seneca Nation wanted to celebrate an Independence Day of another country, there are a whole lot of other indigenous people, brown people, that in this hemisphere that the Seneca Nation could have declared as an Independence Day. But for them to somehow, for whatever reason, feel compelled to suck up to Israel, I mean, do they honestly think Israel is going to do the same in kind? That they're going to return the favor and recognize the independence or the sovereignty of the Seneca Nation? Come on. That's not going to happen. Israel is totally dependent on the United States politically, militarily, economically, in all kinds of different ways. And you know what? Many of the the controlling interests of the American economy, who happen to be Jewish, are the very people that were fighting over things like pipelines and hydrofracking wastewater. I mean, again, the logic in this thing, and it begs the question: why? Why would the Seneca Nation president feel so compelled to, like, out of the blue, make this proclamation and to establish somehow officially, in some official capacity, that next Thursday is Israel Independence Day here in the Seneca Nation? I just don't get it. You know what the first question that I saw posted on Facebook? Oh, does that mean we get the day off as nation employees? I mean, I don't know what it's supposed to mean. Look, I understand that it's about blowing smoke up somebody's butt here, but what was it? I mean, who dreamt this one up? You know, and I know how difficult it is to get the Seneca Nation president anytime to sign off on a statement or a declaration or on a position paper. I mean, it's got to go through Seneca legal department. I mean, who are the lawyers? Were they Jewish? I mean, I don't know. Who are the lawyers who approved this thing? Because Todd Gates doesn't just put his pen to paper without having the legal department look at this thing. I mean, I don't get it. And I gotta say, I felt like I had to weigh in on this thing, whether I wanted to or not. I had a lot of people, especially in New York. Look, New York has a large Jewish population, and many of those people in New York, many of the Jewish people that I deal with at WBAI and other places, they condemn the treatment of Palestinians at the hands of the Israeli government. So to make this proclamation just seems inappropriate at best and misguided at least. I mean, or maybe I got those backwards. I don't know. But anyway, I just felt like, I mean, I don't know where this came from, and I know there's already been a bit of some backlash at the Seneca Nation for this thing because, you know, it got posted up, a picture of the proclamation, you know, signed by Todd Gates is all over the internet right now, and so many other native peoples across, you know, Turtle Island, who feel some affinity towards what the Palestinians are going through, are wondering, what the hell is this about? What was Todd Gates thinking? I mean, so look, I don't get it. I don't understand it. And perhaps, you know, they'll do another one of their nifty press conferences and explain why they did this and who, to what means or to what ends it was supposed to have served anything. I don't know. I mean, I've talked to a couple of counselors and they just kind of shrug it. They're just shrugging their shoulders. I don't know. Don't get it. Don't understand. And look, I like I said, I do understand that there are, you know, probably there may be some business possibilities to be done with, you know, with other countries, including Israel. I mean, some medical technology perhaps that could be shared or developed together. But, you know, I think any country or any people who are going to forge diplomatic relationships or commercial relationships with other countries, I think they've got to walk, you know, a little guardedly, I guess, on how they're going to deal with inconsistencies in philosophies, especially as it relates to abusing people and indigenous people. I mean, Israel is clearly in stark violation of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And of course, the United States won't let them, suffer any consequences of that because the United States is in stark violation of it as well. But I mean, Israel is at the place where their violations of the rights of indigenous peoples, Palestinians in particular, are involve killing them. I mean, and unabashedly so. I mean, that's what I just don't understand. I don't understand how anybody living in the world that we live in today can ignore the fact that there's some problems. There's some problems with some of Israel's behavior as it relates to people. And again, so all I can say is I don't understand it. You can see a copy of a photo of the proclamation. Somebody posted it on my Facebook group page. And again, I had people emailing it to me. I had people texting it to me and messaging it to me. I've had people ask me to weigh in on several of the group pages. And finally, somebody posted it on my group page. And look, I responded just like I responded to this Buffalo News article. I'm not going to defend the actions of the Seneca Nation or the Seneca Nation president when it's wrong. And, there are a whole number of things that the Seneca Nation does right. And there's also a number of things that they do wrong. And, I'm oftentimes trying to explain, some of the poor messaging that the Seneca Nation does. I'm not even going to try to explain what Todd Gates was thinking here. But, I'm certainly there with the Seneca people in defending their right to do gaming and the right not to be squeezed by the state of New York. I tried to, in the last show, explain what in my view was behind the Seneca Nation suing the state over the Thruway. It wasn't very well explained at press conferences and in the press releases I saw. So, look, I try to help with the messaging to some extent. I won't help where the messaging is indefensible, and that's where I find this proclamation issue. So, I've got some other issues with some of the things the Seneca Nation has done, and some of which I've talked about on the show. But look, I live here, and I live amongst the Seneca people, and I'll defend the Seneca people, and I'll defend the sovereignty of the Seneca Nation. But I don't know, the idea of comparing the fight for native sovereignty with the military aggression that the state of Israel employs is, I'd shy away from calling that a common passion for freedom or independence. I don't know. I think that's a whole different animal. So look, I did want to get through that stuff. So look, back a little bit on the gaming issues. I think it's really important that that the Buffalo News be held accountable for the position they take, because they are in a position of influence. So when the news, and especially when they say it's coming from their editorial board, that's the view of the newspaper. Look, we deal with some of the racist coverage of Andrew Cuomo's comments when he's talked about the Senecas have a history of breaking deals. Look, the state of New York has that problem. The United States has that problem. The Seneca Nation has been screwed by the state, and that's what the basis of this Thruway deal is. They've been screwed by the state in terms of interference with their commerce at the same time that the state has unfettered access running their commerce through Seneca territory, and actually turns the road into a commercial enterprise itself. So our dealings with the state are contentious at best. And I remember Todd Gates being asked that question a number of years ago. How would you explain your relationship with the state? And he said it's complicated. No, it's not complicated. It's contentious. When you've got the governor of the state of New York spewing racist comments, and now you've got the Buffalo News clearly buying in and supporting the governor's position on this stuff, as it has with many of its comments. I will say, Tom Precious, who was the Buffalo News correspondent, probably treated this issue more fair than the Buffalo News itself is treating it. And I'm not a big fan of how Tom Precious has covered a lot of the Seneca issues and the native issues out here. We've been battling the state for our right to conduct commerce, our right to freedom and sovereignty, and asserting our sovereignty. So I don't know who Todd Gates is comparing our warrior spirit to, but I don't know. I mean, I think he's comparing apples and oranges here, if you ask me. But I've got to say that some of this the stuff that we find ourselves up against is a pretty large challenge. Hey, look, I wanted to mention not this Wednesday night, but next Wednesday, I'm doing a screening of a film in Brooklyn, New York, at the Commons, which is the cafe. Well, Commons is the building that WBAI's studio is in, but the ground floor is like a media center, an event center, and a cafe downstairs. And I do screenings down there. And I'm screening a film called Man versus Ford. And what Man versus Ford is about, it is about some of the struggles that the Ramapo Lenape have endured in their home territory, which is right around that area of the New York, New Jersey border, in southern New York. And one of the challenges they had involved Ford Motor Company doing illegal dumping of toxic waste, paint sludge, and a number of other things on their territory. And Man versus Ford is the film, documentary film about that battle that the Ramapo had, and frankly, what they endured with all of this toxic dumping. And and the crazy part is, the position Ford Motor Company says, well, there's nothing illegal with what they did. So when I hear somebody like the Buffalo News talking about ethics, look, when I think about the things that were done to Native people and to Native land and to land in general, and then the answer is, well, there was nothing illegal about what I did. Ethics and morality seem to be missing, across the board when it comes to the things that were done to us. So when I hear the Buffalo News talk about our ethical obligation, and then I look at Man versus Ford. This was ended up being a lawsuit, and ultimately the Ramapo did win in their case against Ford Motor Company. Unfortunately, as the film will show, and again, as some of the guests who will be in attendance will mention, what Ford got was a slap on the wrist, and what the Ramapo got was very little in return for the contamination that their land has suffered and their people have suffered. I mean, part of the thing is, some of these kids were playing in this paint. They didn't know it was toxic. It just was there. There were sludge ponds of paint that you could walk across, and then if you fell through, your foot would turn red with paint. I mean, they were literally playing in this stuff. Nobody took any responsibility for it, and so the cancer rates went through the roof. And this is an example of what indigenous people who really stayed to themselves in such a way that Ford knew they can get away with this kind of stuff. So this is the behavior of capitalism, of the American system, and the American way. And I'll tell you, the Ramapo Lenape are still dealing with racism. They had some land that somebody who was really sympathetic to their cause gave them, and the white people around there are doing everything to make their lives miserable. Not this coming Saturday, but next Saturday. I'm sorry, this coming Saturday, there is an event happening in Mahwah, New Jersey, which is this land that the Lenape have essentially reacquired through this gift, and they're hosting an event there from noon till 3:00. This is on Halifax Road in Mahwah, New Jersey, and this is them receiving a totem pole that has come from the Lummi people out in the Northwest, and so it's a ceremony. It's it's an event, a social event that the public is invited to. But I mean, when I see the challenges that are going to, and just going there is going to show your support for what these Native people continuously have to endure. and again, me showing this film in at the Brooklyn Commons next Wednesday at 7:30 p.m. Showing the film Man versus Ford will be an opportunity for people to learn just how deep the racism goes, and how it is racism that is experienced at the hands of um, Ford Motor Company, major corporations, the municipalities, the state, the federal government, and the court system. So I'm screening that film next Wednesday at the Brooklyn Commons, and again, yeah, check it out. I've posted the trailer to the film. It was an HBO documentary that was done a number of years ago, and I encourage you to check it out. And if you're in New York next week, then by all means come down to the Brooklyn Commons at 388 Atlantic Avenue and sit with us. In fact, some of the folks in fact, my friend Vincent Mann is going to be one of the folks in attendance, and we'll talk about the film. We'll talk about what the Ramapo continue to experience, and of course, there's no other way to describe it, but some of the blatant racism that still exists, and I call it blatant, but also the unique racism that Indigenous people experience here in the in the United States. All right, well, that about wraps it up. Hey, this is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native. I thank you for stopping by and spending the hour with me. We'll do it all again on Friday, and of course I do my show in New York, and that's Thursday mornings from 10 till noon on WBAI. We do Facebook live stream that show as well, and you can catch it at WBAI.org. And I think Vincent Mann may even join me for the program on Thursday. So we'll check that out as well. We'll see you. Otherwise, we'll see you on Friday. Nyaweh.